If everybody's using the word Perry, more people know the word Perry, it lifts the drink up. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Bringing us into episode 410 of Cider Chat, we heard from Albert Johnson of Ross-on-Wye Cider and Perry Company, based in Ross-on-Wye in the UK. That's out in the West Country, where they have pears. And pears are the topic in this episode. We're going to be hearing a pre-recorded panel discussion from CiderCon 2024. It was titled Pear Necessities, the Fruits and Flavors of International Perry. It was moderated by Adam Wells, who has a book coming out this May titled Perry, A Drinker's Guide. And we also had Laura Cherry of Dragon Head Cider. That's out on Vashon Island, just to the west of Seattle. It's about a 15-20 minute ferry ride to a enchanted land. Also on the panel was Natalia Wszelaki, also known as Cider Explorer on Instagram. And of course, Tom Oliver, whose cidery is just up the road from Ross-on-Wye, which makes that area truly a destination by all means. We're going to be hearing from this entire panel coming up as the featured conversation, and I really want to say, Ciderville, you are in for a treat.
Rhea?
Yes, Perry Pear?
I do think we should refer to everyone for this episode as Perryville.
Perry?
No, it's okay, Mr. Quince. I think Perry has a point. I mean, we have Ciderville, which is all our friends out there, but we also have a really specific audience who absolutely embraces pears. So I'm cool with that. We could refer to everybody in this episode as Perryville.
Let's do it.
Indeed. Thank you, Medlars. I'm sorry, Mr. Quince. There are no Quinces in this episode.
Oh, brother.
Okay, Palms, hang on. Hey, look, everyone out there in Perryville.
Thank you, Rhea.
I just want you to know that you're hearing from the Talking Palms. We have Perry Pear.
Yes, of course I am Perry Pear.
And Mr. Quince.
Hello.
And the Medlars.
Hello.
They're known as the Talking Palms, and they help me out here at Cider Chat Central. So I think we're all in agreement. We're just going to go with Perryville for this episode.
Yes, I think that's a very good idea.
All right. Well, let's keep on rolling forward. We're going to go next to some news from out and about in Ciderville.
Roger that.
Okay, let's roll it. It's time for Who's Been Cross-Promoting Cider? And we're looking at the time between last week's episode 409, titled Pilot Guy and Intel Girl. And wow, what an episode that was. It was all with Scott and Ginger Wierzbanowski, founders of Olympic Bluffs Cidery and Lavender Farm. And that's at the Olympic Peninsula, the top shelf of the Olympic Peninsula that is right on the Salish Sea next to Port Angeles. Oh, you got to listen to that episode. So we have a couple of folks, and it's pretty exciting to kind of see who's been posting. We saw, once again, Rakapak Cidery in Denmark made a mention and shared the episode last week on their Facebook page. We saw Oliver Cider and Perry Ltd., that it's not really company, it's LTD, shared both to the Oliver Cider and Perry page and to the London Cider House. We want to give a big tip of the glass to the London Cider House. It's a cider bar in London. Like, who wouldn't want to go there with some really fine ciders? So we're going to have links in the show notes to those folks. We also saw that Snoopy Loves a Cider on Instagram, and you just look for that, Snoopy Loves Cider, and it's all these photos of a glass with Snoopy featuring a cider. And they listened to a past episode with Stormalong Cidery, which is based in Massachusetts. And there's actually 2 episodes with Stormalong. The first one was when they were still based in Sherborne, Massachusetts, and that's episode 36. So that was in season 1, which is around 2015, 2016. incredible. And then we had episode 239, which was all part of like building a cidery, and that's called Scrub-a-Dub, Valve, and Vessels. And we were at their new location at the time in Leominster, Massachusetts, and now they're building out another location. They're moving away from Leominster, so we'll be keeping up with Stormalong as they move forward. But Stubby mentioned that on the Instagram page that is called, once again, Snoopy Loves Cider. And we also saw our friends at De Hananer Cidery in the Netherlands posting episode 409 with Olympic Bluff Cidery on their Instagram page and putting the hashtag #XPromoteCider. And that's what we're really looking for, to keep cider in the news. And we also love it if people could download the info flyer about Cider Chat at ciderchat.com and post it in your tasting room so patrons and guests and friends and family can know that there is a podcast and Cider Hub with so much info, 400 plus episodes, and there's a good chance that you out there in Ciderville have a tasting room and you've been on this podcast already. So why not share the good news so folks can learn all about you and discover your story and your products? The French Cider Tour is taking place this coming September 2024 to Paris, Normandy, and Brittany. I have a little audio clip from one of the last French Cider Tour participants. This is Dr. Deborah and her husband. They are both retired marine biologists who came on the tour. Deborah will tell you just a little bit that she does have an orchard, but she does not make cider commercially. And her husband came on the tour because he wanted to go along with his wife, and he was kind of pleasantly surprised. So let's roll to that clip next.
Hello, my name is Deborah Nelson, and I'm a home orchardist, cider maker from Southern Oregon in the Rogue River Valley. I love French ciders, and I grow a lot of French cider trees, but I hadn't been exposed to tasting very many French ciders, so this was the perfect trip. The quality and the characteristics of the cideries that we visit was far exceeded my expectations. This was a fabulous tour, and I would encourage anyone to go.
I'm Dr. Dave Nelson, and I'm from Southern Oregon, retired marine biologist. Came on this tour with my wife Deborah, who's also a biologist, and I was sort of the baggage carrier, but I really enjoyed the trip. I guess what I enjoyed most about the trip was the people. The driver, David, who was very professional, drove the bus and always felt very comfortable. I could sit up and watch the houses and the landscape and all the trees and all the environment that people live in this country. I didn't like Paris because it's crowded, but I really loved the countryside, which is where we spent almost all our time. I liked our interpreter and guide, Pamela, who was always smiling and friendly and helped us with languages. I'm terrible with languages, and she didn't embarrass me at all. She helped me learn things, and we asked her questions about French and the French people, and she told us. I love the people of the countryside. You know, you hear that the people aren't friendly here or not very nice, and that's completely untrue. Everybody was always very helpful here, and I love that part of it. I loved working with Rio, kept us organized and made us understand this was more than just an exercise. It was kind of a fun. It was supposed to be fun and a good trip. And she took us around to all the different types of cideries, and it was nice to meet the cidery people, a whole range of people from big ones to little ones, and everybody was just really helpful. And that was the part I enjoyed, was the people, and also the people that. On the bus, the people that we went with, everybody would. As we got to know everybody was just really friendly, and they shared their Calvados, and they shared their cider, and they shared their sausages and all the food with us. And we all shared. It was like one big happy family. So that's the part I enjoyed in the trip the most, is the people.
Yeah, the people. They are the best. You can find out the info about the French Cider Tour by going to ciderchat.com. Look for the tab that says Totally Cider Tour, and you'll just scroll down there. You'll get to see the itinerary. It has a fee, and then you'll send an email this way to info@ciderchat to get the reservations, because we are starting to lock it down. There's only a couple seats left. Some more seats just got filled. I mean, we are almost to full capacity, which is not like a busload of 50 people by any means. We keep it small and intimate so we could have plenty of room and lots of fun. Again, check it all out at ciderchat.com. Go to the Totally Cider Tour, and I hope to see you in France.
Walking through the orchards.
It's time now for our featured presentation, a pre-recorded panel discussion from CiderCon 2024 titled Pear Necessities, the Fruits and Flavors of International Perry. By going to the show notes at ciderchat.com and looking for episode 410, you'll be able to get the links to all the speakers on this panel and also the names of the different perries that were being discussed and tasted. Are you thirsty yet? Well then, grab a glass and join, shall I say,
Perry?
Yes, Perry Pear, this Perry Chat, featuring the panel discussion on Pear Necessities, the fruits and flavors of international perry.
Here to talk about perry, which is a massive, massive topic, obviously, and we've got three amazing makers, and in fact, I think Europe's longest-standing cider and perry blogger with us, so amazing, amazing panel that I'm really grateful to be a part of. And I'm extra grateful that it is a panel, because it means if anyone asks a difficult question, I can go, oh, how interesting. Tom, what would you say to that? Tom will take us through English perry, particularly 3 counties, and a bit of an overview on perry generally. Then Albert's going to lead our discussion on varieties of pears. Natalia's going to take us through continental European pears. And then finally, we're going to come back to America, and Laura's going to talk to us about American perry. So loads of really exciting stuff to cover. We'll be using each of their perries as the kind of focus for the questions at each time. But I hate kind of sitting with a bunch of perries in front of me that I'm not allowed to touch. So by all means, crack on with having a smell and a taste as we go through. And, when we get to the end, if you've been good, we'll do any questions if there's a bit of time left. But yeah, so my name's Adam, first of all. I'm a sort of multi-purpose drinks writer, I guess, and sort of Swiss Army knife of writing about booze. I originally worked in the wine industry, and then I started writing about whiskey on the side, and then I switched from writing about whiskey on the side to writing about mainly cider on the side for ciderreview.com and a few other magazines and websites. And as I got more and more into cider, being based in the UK, I was noticing that there was this amazing other drink that lots of makers, particularly in the 3 counties, Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire, and across the border into Monmouthshire and Wales, seem to be making. And it tasted very different to cider. It was made by a lot of the same people. The fruits grew in a lot of the same orchards, but it had its own flavors and textures and and characters and stories. And the more I tasted, the more I kind of became compelled by this amazing drink that could be made from trees that were 300 years old and grew 60 foot high, and made from fruits that literally would be rejected by pigs, but that sometimes made the best perry of them all. And, so the more I kind of visited people like Albert and Tom, the more I wanted to know, and the more frustrated I kind of became that there would only be sort of, a chapter in a cider book, or a few sentences here or there about perry, and so I, say to my partner, I wish there was, a book on this of the sort that I read when I got into wine or whiskey or cider or whatever it was. And she'd say, well, why don't you try and write it? And I'd say, well, no, because, only an idiot would publish on something as niche as perry. But then luckily this year, Camera Books decided that they'd let me have a go. So I actually had to delete that bit about idiots and so my book, Perry, A Drinker's Guide, is coming out in May, which I'm really excited about. But, bless you, thank you. But the point is, it's all about the fruits and flavors of perry, and not just UK perry, because perry is an international drink with a surprisingly large and international history. So I'm really glad that we can kind of use this amazing panel to dig into a load of that. So without further ado, we'll get on to this up and coming young perry maker, who I think might amount to something. I dare say Tom is the reason that loads of you are here. But Tom, nonetheless, could you talk to us a little bit about, an introduction to yourself, but specifically as well, how you came to perry, what drew you particularly to perry and keeps you with perry even today?
Okay. Thank you very much, Adam. Yes, Tom Oliver from Open Pitched in Herefordshire in England. We think that perry, on its day, is the finest of all the drinks in the cider and perry category, bar none. It truly does give you the opportunity to make a wonderful drink. And I'm not using the microphone. All right, well, sorry, Laura. Cheers. Let's dispense with the drink itself first. So, as Adam said, you can get stuck into this. This is called, so I haven't omitted 2 letters. And there used to be a drink, a bitter lemon drink, I think, from Britvic or something. You know who. It's nothing to do with that. But I don't know what's in the name. It's a bottle-conditioned perry. And it is made from 3 varieties: gin, blatantly red, and butt. So late October 2022, they would have been picked. We would have pressed them and keeved them. That would have then meant that we would then have wrapped them, I think, 3 times. We would have bottled it because it obeyed my keeving laws in May 2023. We released this just over Christmas. Well, it hasn't actually really been advertised as released in the UK yet, but I really wanted something to bring over, so we pushed on. In reality, it's probably a tad early, but it's fine. It's a great perry. It's a very simple perry in my estimations. Got some lovely aromatics going for it in terms of how I see perry, and it's just a really nice simple drink and just really enjoyable, flavoursome, and I hope that you can perceive it in that light. On the farm this year, we got 31,000 litres of perry. I think around about, we're hoping, depending on how successful it is, we'll have between 8,000 and 12,000 litres of Keeve perry, and the rest will be into various other formats. So we're very, very keen on perry, and I think with everyone here, I think I sense a really renewed interest and vigour in perry, which is really, really exciting. Adam asked me to talk about 3 counties perry. So if you know of the 3 counties in England, Herefordshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire, they're counties that surround the River Severn. And so geographically, left-hand side of England, before you get into the bit of Wales, there's a inlet, that's the River Severn. And perry pears tend to be around that area. Why? Why are they around that area? So here's a brief little story as to why some thinking is as to why it's there. The native wild pear in the UK is the Parus parasta. The cultivated pear is the Parus communis, and that came originally from Asia, and it came into the UK via Rome, and the Romans were very, very keen on pear. So why around the 3 counties and why around the River Severn? We were invaded at one stage by the Romans. They were very successful till they got as far as Scotland. And then, like most wise people, they thought enough's enough. We'll build a wall, keep them that side of it, and we'll be right. Then, obviously, over those times, Rome rewarded their successful generals with land, particularly farmland, so that they could retire and feed themselves, feed their families, and look after this land. And while the land around Rome and on the banks of the Tiber was freely available, that was fine. But after a while, so many generals were rewarded, they wanted more land. They considered the soils and the land on either side of the River Severn to be of an equivalent standard. So the poor generals that couldn't get land around Rome got rewarded with land up and down the River Severn. They bought over pears. Fantastic. Of course, at some stage, the Romans left the UK, and that left the pears that they planted the orchards went into decline. But a lot of the trees self-seeded, interbred with Parus parasta, and these were the wild pears, the forerunners of our perry pears. So, in a way, that's a lovely story as to why we happen to have got perry pears in our area, and they don't seem to be anywhere else. As to whether it's true or not, of course, I've got no idea. But it's a good way of filling my 5 minutes. I thought it's really good. Okay. But no, I love it. I love it because, in a way, those are the sort of stories about which, perry deserves some little mystery and some magic as to why we get it. The reason that perry stays in the 3 counties is that we're full of... I'm looking at Albert, because Albert's no idiot. But, we really, really believe in this this fruit, but my goodness, why would anyone ever want to work with a pear? It is, you need your head examining. It really is a problem fruit. But I go back to where we started. It is worth working with because it makes the most delicious drinks.
You've anticipated my next question, which was going to be whether you could talk to some of the challenges of making perry compared to cider.
Okay, so challenges: shape, size. Two things I know a lot about. They defy mechanical harvesting because they just don't really suit any form of mechanical harvesting. We can get away with it slightly, but so that's a shape thing, size thing. They go from the smallest to so pretty chunky looking steel yard balls is a great sounding perry pear, and it looks like a couple of those wrecking balls going backwards and forwards. Not that big, but they are significantly big. So all different sorts of sizes. They sink in water, unlike apples. So if you want to run them through your cider processing system, they're not really convenient for doing that. That's enough to stop a lot of people in the first place. So that's another aspect of it. They have a degree of sorbitol in them, which is delightful for sweetness and worrying for other things. So that can be a bit of a problem. I know Albert's going to talk about fire blight later, I'm sure. They frequently need macerating. They've got lots of tannins. I'm no scientist, as you all know, but long-chain molecules that can come back and haunt you and give you these snow scenes in perries are really a pain in the arse, to be honest. One of the lovely things I love about perry is the citric acid in perry, the predominant acid, and all that wonderful sort of melon, guava, lychee, rhubarb, ginger, all those sort of things that come from the citric acid. But the other things that come from citric acid is this ability for it to latch onto lactic acid bacteria and to turn into acetic acid, which for everyone, well, no, not for everyone, but for a number of people who have been making perry over the years is one of the things that probably stops them making perry, because they get fed up with, running that gauntlet, because it'll happen whether you've got the best process in place or not.
And the years that you've been making perry, what will be the changes that you've seen in the particularly and specifically the UK?
Perry was the first alcoholic drink advertised on UK TV as Baby Sham, going back to the 1950s and 60s. So, I mean, we had a flying start in terms of profile and advertising, and we have gone downhill ever since in terms of the public perception. But what I think we have got right now is that wonderful zeal and vigor that comes with youth and with people who I don't mind working with something that's really demanding. People set aside all those challenges I've just listed and go, every single challenge is worth it because the end result is this wonderful, wonderful drink. And I sense that coming with people. So who was here for my mammoth, wonderful, exhausting 2016 talk on perry? Emily. Yeah, Ben was too. That's pretty good going in half a dozen. All fresh people. This is good. So that is exactly how I see perry. All right? There's a few of us stalwarts, but there's a lot more people coming into it. So that's fantastic.
And Albert, you're a youth with zeal and vigor. Does your experience of Three Counties perry and the time that you've been making tally with Tom's?
As in with it on the rise.
Yeah, with what?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, perry is for sure the drink in the UK that people are most excited about, that is converting more people to drinking cider and perry than anything. And there's more producers, more interest in it. And I am on the strict orders not to talk about fire blight until later. But that's our biggest problem right now, is that the varieties we got in the UK, you'll know the names of some of them. We've got Thorn from me, Tom's is blatantly red and butt. And they're all amazing ancient trees, ancient varieties. Nobody knows anything about them. So fire blight's starting to impact us and dampen the excitement in it, because you're discovering an orchard that's been planted 100 years ago, nobody's been tending to it, and then in the last 3 years you might have lost the trees. So it's tough. But at the same time, for us, perry in the UK kind of went up and down. As Tom said, it started really great. And then when flavoured ciders entered the UK market, that made the drink much, much harder to sell, because people just started to see the words pear cider everywhere, and perry went out of the lexicon. But that has shifted. And the whole rise, the interest in higher quality drinks, high quality food, things that have authenticity, provenance, sustainability. Perry hits all of those better than any other drink. The age of the trees, the way they grow, how they're used. And so it's really surging ever since then, ever since 2017. Now it is the drink that people love to share, people are most amazed by, and has such a distinct flavor profile from cider as well.
Yeah. So on that, I guess two points. Firstly, I guess, tell us about your farm and your approach to making perry, and then particularly about what we've got in front of us. Tell us about Thorn.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm fourth generation farmer on our place, which is a 65-acre farm in Herefordshire, and we did have about 100 pear trees 3 years ago. Now we've only got about 75, and there are a multitude of different varieties. They're all standard trees, so in most good years, there's enough to make an individual varietal barrel, which is what we're about. We love giving all of the different varieties the opportunity to express their flavor and give you something different. So in the last 2 years, accounting for biennialism, we've made single variety pears from 30 different varieties, and each of them has a very distinct story to tell. So this is our mission. In the last 4 months, we've released 14 different pears, which is fun for the people that want to taste it. And our idea with this is that when people start to be able to experience those single varieties, really develop their palate by experiencing such a breadth of different flavors, it means when they come back and they drink your blends or someone else's blends, they're getting more enjoyment out of it. They're more likely to keep coming back. And when they enjoy what they're drinking, when they engage with what they're drinking, they feel like they're getting good value for money. So the one we have tonight, or today rather, is our 29 vintage Fawn. Fawn, early season pear, probably the most universally loved variety in the UK for producers. It's a little bit tricky because it goes over quite quickly, as a lot of difficult pears do, but amazing flavor profile, the outer flower in it, the citrusy notes, as Tom was saying about earlier, and to really drive things home for how much we love single varieties. In May this year, we're going to release 9 different versions of this same single variety at once. So we have 19 vintage. We have another batch of this, 19, that will be in that. And then we'll also have 2020, 2021, 2022, all from the same orchard. And then what we've done this year is we've sourced Fawn from 5 different orchards, and they've all been pressed within the same week. They're all being pressed in the same way. And the ambition is to really try and say, what is this variety about? How can we nail it down? We've got 9 different versions, the exact same pear. Here we go.
You need to do 3 more, and then you'll fill a case.
Oh, yeah, that's a good shout. That's a good shout.
But I mean, this is. I love this perry, and this has been. I mean, the Thorn 2019 is one that you released in 2020. So I've been lucky to be tasting this now for the best part of 3 years, and even today it's still. I don't know how you think about this, Natalia, but it still to me has this real vibrancy and intensity. And have you, as a single variety producer, have you noticed as I guess drinkers in the UK have become a bit more, familiar, or people within a bubble of cider and perry have become a bit more familiar with variety names. Have you noticed that some of the kind of big, intense, punchy and particularly flavoursome varieties have started developing a little bit of a cult following?
Yeah, for sure. So Thorn is a big one because it's quite common as well. So a lot of producers can make it. So people really hone in on that flavour profile and they go for it year after year. And then we've also got varieties like Butt that was in Tom's, which is this brilliant pear with really fantastic tannins, late season. And this is another one that people are looking at again and again, year on year. Flaky Bark is another tannic pear that's very distinct, very unusual. And there's only 6 mature trees of that one growing anywhere in the world, but it's being propagated. And hopefully that one, I think, is going to be an opportunity for more producers to start making perry with real depth that holds up over the years. Because the Flaky Bark that we're currently selling is a 2020 vintage. So they have the ability to stand up over time if you make them really well. This version of the Fawn is actually a pet nat. So went in the bottle very young, but it's still tasting super fresh. And even though it's a pet nat, it's not necessarily meant to just be a drink that you have quickly. The different pears, they all require different attention to detail, different processes. You start by making the juice the same, but as Tom says, you have the risk of the citric turning into acetic and all of this kind of stuff, and they all follow a different timeline for when they're ready. We have, most of the perries we release are at least a year old when they come out, because this gives them the time to really develop out. And the challenge as well with sorbitol, you don't know necessarily, is that perry really finished? Perry is very much stop-start. We're all wild yeast, and we don't have nutrient, so we make things hard for ourselves. But the only way we can trust the drinks is if you give them a year, and then you know that the flavors as well are having their best opportunity to mature and develop.
It's fantastic. Natalia, what do you think of the flavors of this perry?
So, well, definitely in the Tom Oliver cider, there is some acidity. Acetics or volatile acidity. So this is what you mentioned. So the lactic fermentation converted citric acid to acetic acid. So you can actually smell it, but still, nevertheless, you get a lot of floral notes, also some elderflower, which is very aromatic. And if we move to the Roussannois cider, so the 4-1 single varietal, it has a different profile. It is more on a berry, like red rose petals. So it really bursts, but it's more on the cleaner side. But it's really beautiful.
Albert, you actually you touched on something I was going to ask about there. You mentioned the flaky pear that only has these 6 mature trees remaining, which the story of how they were discovered is worth repeating, which I'll let you do. But also alongside that, how important is talking about these rare pears? Because not only flaky bark, but the Oliver's copy. There's only 1 mature tree in existence.
Yeah,
it's something that
it's super good. And I've been thinking, so everything we make on the farm is just apple or pear, or sometimes this has just 5% cider in it for reasons. We ran out of pears, so it had to fill the container. Sorry, but we don't do co-ferments or hybrids, which is obviously that's the hype thing at the moment. That's how you can really get into the natural wine bars and everything. And it just clicked in my head earlier that actually we celebrate single varieties and we talk about how amazing they are, but people don't understand how amazing it is to actually drink something made from a very specific variety. It's a unique opportunity to taste something that you wouldn't have ever tasted before or after, because it's going to express that fruit from that year, from that orchard, and all of that. And that is really super exciting. And in the case of flaky bark, these 6 trees, they don't produce every year either. So Charles Martel is a pear expert in the UK, founded the National Pear Collection in the UK, and has literally written the book on it. And he rediscovered this variety flaky bark because it was thought to be extinct. He did so because he was traveling on the road where the trees grow, and they grow right by the hedge. But previously, all the other times that he had driven on this same road, which is near where he lives, so very often, he'd been in a car. So you're going fast enough that you don't really notice the uniqueness of the tree. And then around, I think, 2006, 2010, sometime in that window, for some reason, he was doing as the Romans did, and he was on a horse and cart, traveling at a much slower pace, realized the trees were very unique and distinct, went back and rediscovered the variety. And then since then, we're lucky enough that we're the ones that get the pear, because by chance it couldn't be us. And we've only had 3 vintages out of this orchard in the last 7 years, but every one of them is amazing. And when you tell this story to people that these pears are so special, they get it straight away, because that rarity is something that we can all understand. And from my point of view, one of the exciting things about American perry scene and cider scene in general is the wild trees that are everywhere. All of our varieties in the UK were wild once, 200 years ago, and they've been passed down all this time. But we don't have the wild trees to repopulate our pear orchards or anything else. And the wild trees, the forage fruit, it's hard to scale up, right? It's hard to make a business out of it. But wow, what a story, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the nice thing, as you say, about these rare pears gaining, a little bit of iconic status within the cider and perry communities is that people like Barry, who will come to, have latched onto that and are enthusiastic to propagate those endangered varieties as well. So that's fantastic. Laura, we'll come back to American perry more broadly shortly, but I know that you're growing some English varieties in your orchards, and I'd love to know whether you've noticed a particular difference in flavour that you get from those compared to the same varieties in the UK at all.
So the varieties that we grow include Yellow Huffcap, Gin, Butt, Thistleburn, and Winnell's Long Dawn. And I do think there are some differences. I feel like our perry tends to be a little bit lighter in flavor profile in general. That's just speaking for the perries that we make. I don't know if other perry makers have had the same experience growing those varieties here. When we looked at initially selecting varieties for our orchard, both on the apple side and the pear side, one of the things that we did note was that our climate was actually in many ways very similar to Southwest England. So we felt pretty good about starting with some of those varieties at least. But it's interesting, Albert, you were talking about sort of the wild pears or seedling pears. And we actually, one of the reasons that we decided to make Perry was that we had discovered that there were some very old seedling pear trees on the island where we live and had the opportunity to harvest those. And those were actually the first pears that we started working with. And they did seem to have some similar characteristics to a lot of the traditional Perry pears that we were just becoming exposed to. But those are the ones that I think are the real magic in the Perrys that we make, so it's fun to hear, the idea that perhaps those would be future American Perry pears.
Yeah, I think it's so cool. One of the very first American Perrys I ever had was one from Eve's, and they had a lovely detail on the label saying that the person who collected all the pears, Matt Moser Miller, had walked 150 miles in finding all of these wild pears to make this Perry, which I thought was pretty good going. Natalia, I'd like to move across from the UK to Europe a little bit now. So if you could firstly tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to cider and Perry, please, and then also a little bit about what the German Perry scene at the moment is like.
So first of all, my name is Natalia Wszelaki. So some of you may know me as Cider Explorer, and I'm a Germany-based cider writer, cider blogger, and cider critic. And my focus is entirely, actually mostly on Europe, but now actually because of Brexit, it's more continental Europe. But overall, over the years, I developed interest also in countries that don't really have an established cider and Perry tradition. So countries like Poland, Latvia, or Croatia, or Belgium. So the focus actually now, I intend to, with my blog, to shed light on what's happening out there and with what apple varieties cider makers or Perry makers work there, and just so the world knows what's happening in these regions. And now, how did I get to Perry and cider? Well, I once went to a pub in English. It was an Irish pub in Berlin, and I was very surprised to see that the price of beer and cider were actually different. So beer was like around 3.50 euro, and for cider it was like around 6 euros. And I was like surprised. Wow, where does this difference come from? And then I started researching, and I found out that I discovered a fascinating world of Perry and cider. That there are so many apple varieties, and depending how you make Perry, which varieties you make, which technique you use, and the terroir, whether they all have an impact on that. So this is how I actually developed interest in this world. So this is how I got to cider. As for the scene in Germany, in terms of Perry, it is actually a bit difficult because there is several cider makers or Perry makers who overall have a Perry in their portfolio. I mean, there is a sort of a cider revival at the moment, so you could see that also Vinny tried to also add cider to their portfolio. They also, apart from wine, make cider, but not really Perry. So if we are talking about Perry, you can see there are cider makers or Perry makers actually in south of Germany, in so it's like the states in Baden-Württemberg or in Bavaria, and there are people who, like Barry Masterson, art cartel writer, who really develop. They really try to make Perry great again, you could say.
Tell us a little bit about the Perry we're drinking and the producer behind it.
I think I'd like to start, to highlight who Barry is and what is cartel writer. So it might sound German to you, and you're not wrong with that. It's just Barry is actually, he's Irish, who came a few years back from Ireland to Germany. This is because of his wife. And in 2019, he set up a cidery called Cartel Writer, and he makes maybe 2,000, 3,000 liters annually, so it is a really small cider and Perry venture. And I wanted to say that this is actually really special. Everything he makes is special, but since he experiments a lot, so he makes each batch of his cider does not exceed 100 bottles. And so the Perry that we're about to try today, there are only 80 bottles. So meaning if we have distributed 11 bottles, so maybe there are 69 left. And with what is Helden? Helden is a single, not only varietal cider, it's a single tree cider. It's a tree that is around 140 years old and bears fruit apparently every second year. And unfortunately, the variety is not known. I know that Barry is about to send the DNA sample just to check, what kind of variety that is, just to double check. But he has an assumption, and it is held. It's a name of actually field that sits actually in the tree field that sits in this area, and used to be a former vineyard. So I think if you can see that is actually a very nice one. It is slightly pinkish, which is rather maybe not strange, but it's actually unusual for a Perry. But still, this is actually very special. And if you take a sniff, then you can also actually see that there are also sort of a lot of berries. There's a lot going on actually on the nose, and it is acid led. It has a tickle of tannin, and just beautiful.
Yeah, it's always a treat to try Barry's berries, especially as you say, he makes them in such tiny amounts. Barry's a really special guy, not only because he makes these amazing perries in Germany, but he's definitely one of the most active people in talking about perry and pears and talking about them on social media and kind of trying to bridge those, bridge different countries and perries and so forth. Albert, you've had some conversations with him because, of course, he's got some flaky bark in his International Perry Pear Project. I'd love to know a little bit more about some of your conversations with Barry and what he's doing with the International Perry Pear Project.
Well, I can't remember most of them because we were drinking, but yeah, I mean, the main thing to commend Barry on it is that he is unifying the different pear regions of Europe, basically, and collecting all these varieties in the same place, creating a nursery orchard in his hometown in Germany, and questing to bring some of these old fabled varieties back together and get them going. I mean, Barry, I think the reason his perry is so good is the attention to detail with fruit selection. Pears are very, very unforgiving fruits. And so Barry, he's a single tree, he's got 100 bottles from it because he probably had to leave more than half the crop on the ground. And that's a key factor in making good perry is selecting the best quality fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, his knowledge of the history of European perry is phenomenal, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to write half as much as I have in the book about Central European perry without him. But so Natalia, you just earlier there said that that the modern perry scene in Germany is quite small. But I think if you go back even as recently as sort of 60 to 70 years, it was a real mainstay of rural culture, not only in South Germany but in Switzerland as well, and even Luxembourg, and kind of right across that sort of mid-northern.
It has a very interesting history in Europe, and it has been widely consumed actually since medieval times. But it's interesting to see that depending actually on the region of Central Europe, it had different peaks in terms of popularity. So when you look at Austria and Switzerland, you could see that that it was a very popular drink offered in tavern. It was untaxed, rather cheaper than beer, so that's why it was really popular and really widely consumed. And only until 1950s, I think, in Switzerland, when the government decided to basically cut off all the trees, so declared perry for dead. This is because of high alcohol consumption in Switzerland, so that's why all the perry trees they were just cut off. In terms of Austria, there was after the Second World War, there was a decline in interest. There was just changing in farming, so there was more interest in different kind of perries. But then again, if you look at Germany, perry was not that popular actually since medieval times. It was consumed, but not that widely. But then again, in the 17th century, after the 30-year war, and there was. We could think that Europe, this part of Germany was really destroyed because of that war. It took like 30 years, so there were no vineyards, but the taverns had to offer something to drink, a sort of alternative to wine. So that's why it turned out that pears and apples make a great alternative. And this is when the point, actually, in the history of perry where the consumption and popularity of this beverage started to rise. And it reached actually peak in Germany around 1938. And so the consumption and demand was really, really high. So imagine that 1 kilogram of a variety called Champagner Bratberner, it was like a week salary of a physical worker. So this was actually really high. So this is where it was the peak in terms of history of Germany in 1938. And unfortunately, after 1948, there was a sort of a change in the currency. People started to get richer. They started to afford beer. And this is where sort of the history of Perry sort of ended, unfortunately, in Germany, so in this kind of region.
I think that's really true right across so much of Europe, isn't there? I mean, the last 70 years have been a story of complete, destruction of pear trees for the most part. So Germany, obviously, you've touched on, but even Domfront in Normandy, which is one of the 3 major regions for Perry in the world. They went from 1.5 million trees in the 1960s to 100,000 by 2000. Austria, obviously similar sort of numbers. Actually, that's quite an interesting question, because you're obviously, being in Germany, you're bordering Austria, that has one of the world's most sort of Perry-focused regions, the Mostviertel. But does much of that make it across to you, even though you're only one country across?
I will disappoint you, because like last month I went to Vienna and I was really trying to find Perry anywhere, Austrian Perry. I failed. I could not find any pear in Vienna, so in the capital of Austria. So it means that Austrian Perry does not get out of Mostviertel, and it is really a regional product, and you will not find it also across the border anywhere.
Well, I mean, Tom, you've probably got the best view of all of us on European and UK Perry as a whole. How important do you think it is that there's a little bit more exchange of knowledge and connecting of these sort of? I mean, we're discussing it here and on the across an ocean and a continent, and yet these discussions don't really happen all that often. It seems to me publicly in the UK or Europe.
Yeah, I think that's true. The discussions are probably more limited to the idiots that are immersed in Perry and Perry making, and that little close-knit community. But there is an opportunity for that to be expanded. I mean, whether there is any ability to create a forum for Perry, even if it was European Perry, and then have a US Perry forum, something, I don't know. But there certainly is a need to keep exchanging information. And I think this might even neatly lead on to, if you're going to talk about post-American, onto Fireblight and stuff, we need to, in the UK for sure, work out which varieties show any sense of resistance and which rootstocks are preferable, etc., because this is we're in danger at the moment.
There's a real urgency. All right. Sorry, Laura, I've kept you waiting for ages and ages and ages. We'll come full circle back to the Pacific Northwest, because something that's really struck me. I before researching the book, I knew really very little about and had very little exposure to American Perry. But what I was struck by as I started researching, and again at the Cider Share yesterday, was there are actually quite a good number of Perrys and Perry makers, not only in the USA, but particularly here in the Pacific Northwest. So, I guess a question on the state of American Perry as you see it generally, but also particularly how you came to make it yourself and what you love about Perry in America.
Sure, yeah. So I do think there's more and more Perrys being made, specifically in our region. But I also sort of hypothesize that a lot of the cider makers fell into it the same way that we did, which was just like curiosity and sort of a new problem to solve with a new type of fruit that was very similar to cider making. For us, it was these very particular pears that we had come across in, a couple miles from our farm that we were curious to use. But there is no history in our region that I know of, at least, and there aren't a lot of rules, and we really sort of stumbled into it not knowing what we were doing. So, the first Perry we made was less than 1,000 liters, and we didn't use pectinase, and we ended up with something that seemed like floating brains in our juice. And try again the next year. We made some changes and revisions. And I mean, at this point, it's still a very small part of what we do. I thought I'd be the smallest producer that was here, so I'm happy to see that I'm not. But we only make about 4,000 liters of Perry a year and about 1,500 liters of the sparkling Perry out of that 4,000 total. So it's a pretty small production, and it moves, it moves pretty slowly in general. And I think that the truth is that's because, in our tasting room regularly, people come in and they, the first question when they look at the menu, the Perrys are listed at the top and they say, "What's Perry?" So, we're still sort of, in the US, I think we still have that education piece that it's a long way from Perry becoming a particularly popular beverage, I think. But it's certainly worth, pursuing because, like the others have said, I think it makes a really beautiful beverage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's any consolation, I'm in the UK where there is one of the main Perry regions, and when people find out I write about Perry, they usually don't say what's Perry, they say who's Perry. So there's not that much more. But I've been so excited to try this one because it's my first chance to try one of your Perrys, and I remember the first time I interviewed Tom for Cider Review about Perry, and I asked for makers that he really admired. You and Wes were right at the top of his any Perry they make, he said. So tell us about the fruits and the method that's gone into what we're drinking here.
Sure. So this is the 2020 harvest, and it's a combination of the pears from our orchard. So those are the varieties I named earlier, and then some Hendry Huffcap pears as well that we purchased from another orchard. The seedling pears from Vashon Island, and that's really sort of what I feel like is the key magic piece to any of the Perrys that we make. And then some Taylor's Gold pears as well.
Fantastic.
And then, so fermentation finished in 2021, but we didn't bottle for secondary until 2022, and this one was disgorged in May of 2023.
Fantastic. So about a how long is that on these?
About 9 months.
About 9 months. Perfect. Yeah, I think it's lovely. It's got a fantastic. I think traditional method works seemingly so well for Perry because it's just got that lovely sort of roundness of fruit, but it's such an elegant drink as well.
Yeah, agreed. And we only do 2 products in our whole lineup with the traditional method, the sparkling Perry being one, and a Newtown Pippin single varietal being the other. And I think that in particular that method works really well when you're working with fruits that have a little bit more of a delicate flavor profile and a little higher acidity. That's at least in our experience.
Yeah, I'm really curious because I think I know that Barry uses a few dessert pears sometimes, but not in that. But you're the only maker here who is also using a dessert fruit as well as Perry pears. So can you speak to how it is working with those sorts of pears and the different flavors and textures and challenges, I guess?
Yeah, they're quite a bit different. In general, a lot of times at the end of harvest and pressing season, you'll hear me say, I hate pears. Because like Tom mentioned, they sink. Sometimes there's issues with the grinder. Their window for when they're actually perfect to be pressed is about 30 seconds. And pressing them late is the worst nightmare of your life. And especially some of the more culinary pears tend to be a bigger struggle in that pressing process for sure. Do you want to hear more reasons I don't like pears?
No, this is the thing. Whenever I speak to any maker about Perry, their opening salvo is a list of reasons not to. so I'm glad that that's stayed the case with this panel that wouldn't be authentic. And Natalia, what do you think of this Perry?
Well, definitely it has. It's not that intense as the previous pears that we tasted. It has you can tell that there are not really a lot of tannin, but still, there is some brioche, so we can really taste that the method that was used for making this Perry. There are also floral notes, and it's also quite pleasant. It's just more on the lighter side. So I think it's a good. I mean, we're showing now that presenting that Perry has actually a lot of faces, and depending where do they come from, they have their own style. So I think it's actually quite a good thing.
I think that's such a key point because I mean there's been talks already that have pointed out that cider is often seen as this, homogeneous monolith, and I think Perry even more so. It's always kind of it's light, it's delicate, but you taste something like Albert's Thorn, or particularly if you have his flaky bark, there's so much breadth of flavor and style, within just individual Perry regions, or even within individual Perry farms, let alone, when you look at it from a global perspective. It's something I'm really, I guess kind of linked to what we've just been talking about, but something I'm really curious about. Obviously, Tom and Albert are, making their Perry in a region with this long history. Do you think there are advantages or disadvantages to having almost your kind of clean slate, as it were? If there's less.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would be curious to ask Tom and Albert if there are sort of rules imposed on their process to a certain extent, because at least from my perspective, we do have a lot of freedom to experiment and try new things without anyone looking in on our project and saying, well, that's not really how you do it, because there aren't other producers around us that have long histories of making Perry. So I could see that as an advantage, sort of, but also part of the struggle is that we don't have those wise, folks that have been making Perry for generations to advise us or coach us on how to do things right next door.
Well, Albert's got, a wise former generation looking over his shoulder literally as he does his work, so you're probably the best place to...
Well, it's true that Dad knows all about Perry, but he doesn't know how to communicate it to me, so we're starting from scratch. I think, Laura, expectations about Perry in the UK are bad because people think Perry is too sweet. The big commercial Perrys that have seen success in the UK and that still exist are so sweet that people just automatically say, no, I don't want to drink something like that. And then when they get offered one, even if it is a sweet Perry by craft cider maker standards, it's still not going to be anywhere near the commercial level. And then it's a new thing. So it's the same problem that everybody has, that all of us are presenting drinks to people and they don't really have a frame of reference for them at all. And that makes it hard to taste something where you have no frame of reference and know if you like it or not. Mostly people's reaction is, oh gosh, well, what is going on? How do I describe this flavor? They don't know the words to use or anything. So it's super important for your Perry to taste as much as you can and develop as much vocabulary for your own drinks as is possible, so that you can guide people and help them understand what they're actually tasting.
Well, that's a perfect answer, because it leads me into the general questions for the group now, which, I guess, how do we explain Perry better to consumers? How do we kind of excite them and get Perry in front of them? How do we get, and especially how do we get them to come back for another glass and to really engage with this kind of amazing, unique, special world?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, in Britain, is that it is lower alcohol than cider normally. This morning I was in the low and no ABV session. People are interested in that, and the fact that Perry actually is more approachable for people who are a little bit wary of that is really good. So this Perry is 6%. Most of our stuff doesn't get much higher than that, apart from flaky bark, and that's always a good starting place. But I'll pass over to Tom, maybe.
Absolutely. I was going to say that flaky bark never wants to ferment more than halfway anyway, so it stays on the low end of the spectrum.
The best sparkling Perrys are really something that should be the standard drink at any wedding celebration, because in my mind it is infinitely more suitable to a broad range of palates who will turn up at a wedding. And champagne is champagne, but even the very best champagne, other than being very costly, it's only paying homage to the tradition of Perry, because Perry came first, technique came from Perry, and everything stems from that. And it is a superior drink. It would be enjoyed by more people. So it's the ideal one for a wedding. But it stems from there. You get it at the right situation, you get it matched with the right food, you get it matched with the right social occasion. Perry is indeed the drink. And I know that Adam is keen to get rid of the saying that Napoleon has claimed to have said, that Perry was the English champagne. But the follow-up to that, whoever wrote this hogwash, was always, in victory you deserve champagne, in defeat you need it. And I love to think that Perry makers have dined out on both sides of that for years.
Well, I mean, whether or not he said it, there's definitely records that they've got at the museum in Domfront that show that a lot of Perry was being tankered over to the Champagne region about 100 years ago for reasons that they'd rather not get into. So,
I mean, I can't think of anything worse than being stuck in the middle of a battlefield having drunk a load of sorbitol heavy Perry.
Laura, I'm really curious to know, how do consumers respond? Is it something that's difficult to communicate what this is to consumers? Do people get it? And I guess a bigger question also for the group is, which we probably should address, is the term pear cider. I don't want to just say yay or nay, but are there benefits and obviously and potentially obviously drawbacks to it as well? Is that a confusing thing or is it a helpful thing?
Well, so I think to answer your first question, I think the key is to get Perry into people's hands and into their mouths. So I know, at least for me, as much as I love, being in the orchard and making quality ciders, my favorite part of the job is actually sharing it with the end customers. I love being in our tasting room and I love doing public tastings, especially because every once in a while you get someone who comes to you and thinks they're not going to like what you're serving. And then you give it to them and they taste it and they think, wait, what is this? And they're surprised by it. And and then they admit to enjoying it. And that's a real success story to me. So I feel like, especially for something as sort of a small segment as Perry is, that's the real key, is to keep exposing people to it and introducing new customers to it and getting it into their mouth. And then I think you're right, Tom, with respect to the celebration piece. And I know for us, the sparkling Perry is one of the most expensive products that we sell. It's just a very labor-intensive product for us. And so it commands a higher price point. But we do have people that seek it out for their New Year's celebrations. We sold a ton of Perry in December for the holidays, and it really does present well for that special occasion kind of beverage, which I think is another unique place that it plays a role.
Yeah, fantastic. So just jumping back, actually, Natalia, I'll ask you first of all. Yeah, do you think that the term pear cider confuses things, or does it make life easier to explain?
Quite on the contrary. I think more people are aware of the term cider, and it's easier for them to actually somehow associate that pear cider is actually a similar beverage just made from a different fruit. So if you were talking, this is actually something that actually helps. So I know that for those from you who are from the UK, it can be sort of a bit like, no, there is no pear cider. But I think in general terms, actually for consumers, this is something that can actually help understand the beverage. Okay. Because cider is already something that most of the time is established.
Well, would either of our makers from the UK like to provide a counterpoint to that?
Well, the only thing, Tom and I, both our company names actually have Perry in the title, which tells most of the story. I think pear cider, I don't like it because I think it took people away from proper Perry, because it's the commercial word for it, basically. It's how I normally see it. And I also think that there's this kind of myth that pear cider is what you have to call your Perry if you happen to use traditional Perry pears. But that's not true. If you use any pear and you make into pure Perry drink, you should be able to say the word Perry. And then I think if everybody's using the word Perry, more people know the word Perry, it lifts the drink up.
Yeah. I guess there's also the thing that, in the UK, Perry and pear cider are legally interchangeable terms, but that's not, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that to be the case here in the US. I believe you can call it, a pear cider would usually be something with an apple base that pear flavoring has been added to. Yeah, Laura, please.
That's one of the things I was going to add, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of cider makers here that are adding other fruit flavors, adjuncts to their ciders, to the apple base as well. Anyways, and so at least for me, being a Perry maker, and a cider maker, when I assume it's a pear-flavored apple cider. And I think it's just another place that if we start using those terms interchangeably, confuses the consumer even more. Who knows what's in that glass?
Yeah, that's true. Well, time's starting to tick. I've got two questions that I'd like to ask. The first, Albert, sorry, I've kept you waiting long enough. Could you tell us a little bit about Fireblight and how big of a problem is it and how big of a threat to particularly UK Perry, but I guess ultimately Perry anywhere?
Yeah, well, in summary, I suspect all of you know what Fireblight is, but if you don't, it's a bacterial disease which affects all palms, but pear trees are particularly susceptible. And in the UK, it unfortunately arrived in the 1950s, but our climate was cool enough that it's never really been a problem until 3 years ago when Fireblight really started doing a lot of damage to a lot of us. Tom and I both lost trees. In fact, his tree is blatantly red and butt. We've had to cut down both those trees in the last couple of years. Our challenge is that we don't know what varieties in the UK have any resistance to it. The US has been dealing with Fireblight so much more than we have for decades now, so there's way more knowledge base here and access to phages and ways to try and fight it. But in the UK, all we've got is pruning. We don't know what it is. Most people don't even know what it is. And my dad had been growing and nurturing these trees for 45 years. When it showed up in 2020, we were like, oh, hang on. Is that here? Fireblight, really? So it's devastating and it spreads super fast. And the mission of my generation of Perry makers is going to be to discover the new varieties. We've been using these varieties for so long, and this is what happens. Eventually, a bacteria or something else comes along and threatens them, and we're losing these traditional orchards of pear. And our only way through is to discover new pears that like growing in the UK, that give us good Perry and everything else. So we're starting a project where we're planting our seedlings, we're starting a breeding program, and we're trying to encourage as many producers in the UK to start doing that as we can.
Yeah, it's so important. I'd like to end on a positive note after that. So just, is there space for optimism in Perry? How can we take Perry forwards? And do you see a kind of, with the asterisk of Fireblight there, do you see a positive future for Perry if it continues on its current trajectory.
I think Perry inspires passion in its drinkers and its producers, even beyond that of cider, which we all love as well. And that passion is spreading, and more people are going for it, and that's what's going to drive Perry on. It's a drink that we can't make enough of now because there's such a good reception to it amongst people who don't drink cider and Perry. When they try it and they know what it is, and you've told them that stories, we've talked about everything, then they really go for it. And that is going to lift us through, and we're going to overcome the fire blight problem eventually.
Absolutely.
That's what I think. Anyone else like to comment on?
Natalia? Yeah, please, by all means. So the question was how you handle the potential side effects of sorbitol, in your marketing and consumer education. So, Tom.
I don't do anything to help people with regards to sorbitol. It's definitely very variety dependent. People are sensitive to all sorts of things, and I really don't want to, put the fear of God into people about the possibility that having a little bit of Perry is going to do anything. It's highly unlikely.
There's something that Ray Williams, who obviously, the father of kind of Perry study in the UK, he felt that a lot of the reputation that Perry had gained as something that causes sorbitol-related problems was actually more to do with the harvesting of overripe or rotten fruit.
There is also a counteraction to this, in that I believe one of the reasons that Perry was such a popular drink from Henry VIII's time onwards in the Middle Ages was that their diet was... I'm sorry to move this on to this particular topic, it's one of my favourites, but their diet was one of so much stodge that honestly the Perry was some sweetness, which was rare in that time, but imagine the relief after a massive 5-day bender at the banquet table to have a glass of Perry and shift the world on a bit.
And so ends the panel discussion titled Pear Necessities, the Fruits and Flavors of International Perry. I do not think that this panel wanted to end the discussion focusing so much on sorbitol. That did feel like it was coming from the audience. There was a number of questions at the end of this discussion, once again, going back to sorbitol, and you could hear it from Tom Oliver where he doesn't really focus in on it. And in my own experience, having drunk copious amounts of Poiré in France, as we do on the French cider tour, it has never been an issue. And I also want to make one more reference here. Adam Wells, who was a moderator, spoke about Domfront, and that is one town in the city of Domfront, which is the region. So Domfront is the region, Domfront is just a town, and there's lots of little towns in there with producers all on the Route du Poiré in France, which we will be visiting this September. We go to the Musée du Poiré, which is outstanding. They just redid it in 2016, and then we'll be visiting makers in that region too. Oh, it's just magnificent. So do check that out at ciderchat.com, the French Cider Tour. Also at the website, you will find show notes for each and every episode of the podcast. So for this episode 410, you will be able to get links to all the speakers on the panel and also the actual Perry being discussed. And there was one maker missing. That was Kilterreiter Cider from Germany. We did have Barry Matterson on the podcast. That episode kicked off season 6 of Cider Chat. So that was around the year 2020, and that was episode 251. It's titled An Irish Expat in Germany. So you could hear the backstory about Kilterreiter and what he is doing there. We've also had Ross Anwai, Cider and Perry Company. We just recently had Albert Johnson on the podcast, and we have had he and his father Mike on the podcast too. And of course, Tom Oliver. Speaking of which, Tom Oliver, we have a little bit more. So let's roll to that clip next.
This is Tom Oliver from Oliver's Cider and Perry in Herefordshire, England. Cider Chat is an audio tonic for anyone interested in the kaleidoscopic mix of people, places and poems that give us this wonderful social lubricant, cider. Ria has you covered. A veritable audible treasure trove. So go on and dig deep and support her.
audio tonic. Wow. Put that in your cup and drink it. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate your support. And I know that a lot of folks out there in Ciderville and Perryville,
Thank you, Rhea.
you got it, Perry Pear, want to emulate Tom Oliver in so many ways. You want to hang out with him, you want to get his input, you want to have him sip your cider and try to do just a little bit of what that guy is doing with his product. So be like Tom and support Cider Chat and help this audio tonic keep reaching out into the world and delivering amazing episodes like this each and every week. You could hit the donate button at ciderchat.com or become a patron like all the fine patrons at the Cider Chat Patreon page. That's spelled Patreon. Google that and Cider Chat. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. Yeehaw!